Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dare to Care. My name is Masha and I just realised that this is my 10th episode that I'm hosting here. It's been over a year since I took over this podcast and sometimes it works a little bit better or worse to find time for it besides the normal everyday madness. But well, here I am and still at it. It's still great to hear new people and also their stories and perspectives on animal welfare and then be able to share it with you. By the way, if any of you out there would like to join Dare to Care and have an exciting conversations with new people and researcher and just people who are really passionate about animal welfare, and if you would like to learn something new then, well, get in touch with me and just text me. But enough about that. Now to my guest today. It's Samantha Sam Ward. She is an associate professor of zoo animal welfare in Nottingham Trent University, and she completed her master and a PhD in animal behaviour and welfare. She sits as the welfare expert advising the UK government on UK zoo matters and has been involved with updating the zoo licensing legislation in the UK. We will talk about in this episode about her passion for zoo animals, what is unique to the welfare of zoo animals compared to other groups of animals. We will talk about the role that research has on the way we keep zoo animals and also why the German zoo in Leipzig is one of her favorite ones. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to this podcast, Sam. I'm really happy that you could make it, and I'm really happy to finally meet you. It's always lovely to meet the person that you've only texted to before. A warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very nice for you to have me and to be invited to contribute to this podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know that much about you. I've only read a little bit about your past and what you've studied and so on the internet. But maybe you can first shortly introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm now an associate professor of zoo animal welfare at Nottingham Trent University in the United Kingdom. Before that, going way back to my, I suppose, beginnings of the zoo world for me, I studied zoology. And I did a placement year at Paynton Zoo down in Devon in the UK. And that's where I first started doing research into zoo animal welfare. And it was that placement, and my supervisor was now Professor Vicky Melfi. So I had an amazing mentor, an amazing kind of insight into the world of zoo research and zoo animal welfare. And it was then that I decided that that's really what I wanted to do. So I went away and finished my degree. I then actually worked within the zoo industry. I was a zookeeper for a few years, working in various different institutions. I then decided that I wanted to get back into that idea of research. So I did a master's and then a PhD, and then again back into sort of industry. So I've kind of flitted between academia and industry throughout my entire career, really, which I think is quite a nice balance, because it means that the work that I do generally links in with industry, and that's what I kind of focus on in terms of my research and the work that I now do. So yeah, I then moved to Nottingham Trent in 2013, I think. So I've been there 10 years now, and yeah, worked up from lecturer, senior lecturer, and like I say, now associate professor.
Amazing, yeah. It's also really interesting to see like the diverse topics you've dealt with, and still there's like this red line that you can follow. So when did you exactly become interested into like zoo animals? Because this is quite specific.
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, I knew that I wanted to work with animals. I think from a young age, being a child, my dad was always really interested in biology and always allowed us to have random pets. So I think my early years, we had, chickens, which back, 30 years ago, or even more than 30 years ago, was quite a strange pet to have, was a chicken. So I think it's more common these days. But yeah, so we had chickens, and we decided that we wanted a pet to mow the grass, or my dad wanted a pet to mow the grass. So he wanted a pony, and we went to a farmer's market to go and pick up a Shetland pony. And I fell in love with this goat, and essentially, because I was going to be the one that was looking after it, it was decided that we'd get a pet goat. And so I think my love of herbivores and my kind of love of strange interesting animals as pets, I suppose, became from that moment. And I then just kind of worked around, various different animals, I suppose. And I think the weirder and the stranger and, working with different and especially endangered animals became more clear to me when I was on my placement year. And decided that was it. Zoo animals was the way forward, and working with these strange animals that are really different and diverse was definitely what was interesting on me.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, especially about your childhood. That's so cool. Yeah, a great dad.
Yes, definitely, and interesting.
Yeah. So this is an animal welfare podcast. So how would you define like animal welfare for zoo animals, like captive wild animals? So what is a bit different maybe to compare to the welfare of other animals, like livestock or pet animals?
For me, I think whether animals captive animals are pets, they're farm animals, they're lab animals, they're zoo animals. So for me, animal welfare is defined as, maintaining the social and the cognitive aspects of the needs of those animals in whichever context they might be. Obviously, we know a lot about animal health, and we know a lot about, what their physical needs are. But I think for me, animal welfare is really important in regards to the mental domain, and certainly of the individual animal. And I think in zoo animal welfare, that's becomes more prominent because we know our individuals. Every animal in the zoo has a name, and they have a record card, and they have all of this, information that's very personal to them. And I think for me, that's sometimes missing in farm animal welfare and, maybe lab animals, because they're collected or researched or looked at as a group, whereas zoo animals is definitely that individual capacity, which is really key.
And what would you say is then the greatest challenge with the individuals that you have in the zoo? Because also the diverse species you have, it's incredible. What would you say are one of the greatest challenges you have faced so far?
Some of the biggest challenges, I think, certainly being, sort of active in research with regards to zoo animal welfare, is the acceptance of sort of scientific robustness, if that's a term. So thinking about, trying to publish in really high impact journals and publish sort of science on zoo animals when you're dealing with two individuals is sometimes very difficult, because essentially what you're looking at is case studies. And those case studies are really important for those individuals, and they're really important for, building that bigger picture in terms of what's important in zoo animal welfare for different species. But it's not always recognised as important because we've not got a group of 8 individuals that's, replicable in terms of lots of different experimental designs.
Yeah. Have you found in your research career maybe, but also your practical experiences as a zookeeper, that there are like specific species where it's more challenging to like have them like in captivity compared to maybe others?
I think certainly in terms of knowledge about species. I'm sorry.
Oh, dog. Hello.
This is Bertie, our deerhound.
Oh, yeah.
Always comes in when he can hear me talking. So I think certainly the knowledge of species that we've got about welfare state is very different. We know an awful lot more about mammalian species. We don't know a huge amount with regards to reptilian or amphibian species in terms of their welfare. We don't necessarily know what good welfare looks like, or what bad welfare looks like in those sorts of species. And I think it's difficult because we can link mammals obviously to ourselves, and in terms of the structure and the knowledge of their biology is a lot better known, and so I think that's where the bigger challenges lie in recognizing how different aspects influence those types of species.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because, during my study, for example, sometimes when you were looking for some guidelines or so, there are certain species where you're 100% sure you will find something online. And then, for some like more exotic ones, or definitely ones that it's for humans harder to relate to, you will find less. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always think as well that there is this kind of push towards, there's got to be certain species that are better in captivity than others. And I think realistically, I think it just comes down to the knowledge of how to keep them. I don't believe that certain species are better or worse off than others. I think it's just depends very much about what we know about them to be able to keep them better, if that makes sense.
Because you have also now like a couple of decades actually of experience, what would you say were the changes maybe that you could have that you could follow in these decades, in the recent decades, about the way how, at least in the UK or maybe also in Europe, how the way we keep zoo animals have changed?
Yeah, so I think certainly, when I first started in the zoo industry, the way that collections were managed was very much kind of what we, I suppose, recognise as folklore husbandry. So it was kind of, this is the way we do it because this is the way we've always done it. And I think now we know an awful lot more about evidence-based management. And because of the increase in research in zoos, whether that's from undergraduate projects, master's projects, PhDs, or, more sort of established academics, like myself, we now know what works and what doesn't because of science. And we know how to treat animals in terms of husbandry techniques and management in terms of, maybe training and things like that, positive reinforcement training. So we actually know we've got evidence to show the best ways of keeping animals rather than this idea of, well, this is the way we've always done it, so we're just going to carry on and hope that it seems to work.
Could you give like maybe one or two examples, the quite practical ones that are easy to like picture?
I think not from necessarily personal experience, but there's a very, very strong evidence trail within the United Kingdom about elephant keeping. So elephants have had quite a turbulent time in zoos. When I suppose maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a report that was released that suggested that elephants in zoos were not good, that we weren't keeping them in very good conditions and that we weren't able to actually provide the appropriate housing and needs for them because of the, stereotypic behaviours that were observed and these, really abnormal behaviours that we were seeing in British zoo elephants. The zoo industry kind of really kicked back about this and sort of said, well, hang on a minute, we've taken on quite a lot of circus elephants and rehomed elephants that were from really poor backgrounds. And actually the way that what you're currently seeing is the historic view of, elephant keeping. We're now, implementing changes and we're putting things into practice so that we can, do things better, and we know we're doing things better. And in actual fact, the government suggested that there was a 10-year elephant welfare project that was developed so that they could, the zoos could evidence that things are changing and that elephants are actually being kept much better in zoos in Britain. And so this 10-year programme of evidence, I suppose, has recently come to a close. And the government are currently reviewing all of the evidence at the moment. And I think it's looking quite positive with regards to the fact that, there is data now to suggest that what we're doing with elephants in captivity in Britain is actually really positive, and we're having a really good impact on their social networks, their management of the animals, how we know how to manage them appropriately. We've moved from this idea of free contact where keepers were going in with the elephants and using negative reinforcers and positive punishment like the anchus and things like that. And we're now moving towards protected contact management system because we've got evidence to show that that's beneficial for the elephants. They have their own social groupings, they have their own settings, and we're just helping them to achieve what they need rather than us being part of their social system. So I think that's a really good example of how evidence has changed the way that we've managed a certain, I suppose, taxonomic group within zoos rather than species.
Yeah, very fascinating. Especially, I never thought about the fact that you have maybe also animals from former circuses that are then being held in zoos, because that has a big impact, obviously, on how they behave.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, stereotypic behaviours are quite a common focal point for lots of, I suppose, anti-zoo or networks and organisations, and they're very obvious to the public, and people are very aware that, if an elephant is swaying its head, it's not in a great space mentally. But I think certainly, like, elephants certainly live for years and years and years. And so whatever has happened to them in previous worlds or lives or enclosures and settings is going to have a long-term effect on them. And so that's going to potentially play into their current behavioural patterns. And so it's important to recognise that that's going to have an impact.
Because you have also some knowledge about like the European differences, maybe, because the differences between countries. What would you say are, because you're more knowledgeable about the UK, like the Britain situation. I live in Germany. Are there like some countries where you have seen or maybe experienced other changes in zookeeping, like, or animal keeping?
I think certainly with the likes of animal training. So over in the United States, they cottoned on to the idea of training animals for husbandry and veterinary purposes much, much sooner than we did do in Europe, for example. So they were doing this maybe in the sort of early 1990s or so, and having really positive effects on the animals. Moving animals, crate training them, putting them into enclosures so that they could be moved easily without stress, without having to knock them down to sleep to move them, was really, something that the United States were doing. Well, American zoos were doing a lot sooner than we were. And I think now it was always viewed in European zoos that, it was a bit circus-like, it was very archaic. We didn't want to teach our animals to perform tricks and, do what we wanted them to do. We wanted them to be natural. But actually we've kind of caught up in a way in recognizing that this is actually a really beneficial way of managing animals, allowing them to do what they need to do for most of the time, but actually training them to come to us when we need to, administer veterinary care or get them to do certain, positions or hold certain positions so that we could take whatever it might need, samples, blood samples, for example, or get them into animal crates so that it reduces stress and those sorts of things. So I think that's probably, in my mind, one of the biggest kind of international changes. Yeah. And we can also see, certain countries, developing countries that are now starting to learn about animal training, and they're kind of slowly catching up as well. So I think there's definitely big trends in the way that we manage animals in zoos and how that kind of flows through sort of patterns of different countries.
Yeah. In the beginning, when you introduced yourself, you mentioned that you worked for a couple of years as a zoo animal keeper for different species, for different animals. And then you also are an expert in like conservation and research, and you are also an animal manager. How would you describe again how all these different aspects and expertise benefit you in then maybe giving advice or just like working now in that field? Maybe you can explain it a bit more in detail.
Yeah, sure. So I think the blend between practice and academia is quite a unique one for myself to sit in, I suppose. Research and practice don't necessarily sit hand in hand. I suppose people that come from very much a research and an academic background don't understand how things work in the zoo world. And it is quite a special world that's quite complicated in some ways. So if you're researching animal welfare and, you don't have external pressures such as there might be obviously the visitor component that you need to pay a lot of attention to, marketing strategies, the fact that you can't control experimental design, you can't tweak and change temperature conditions and, diets and things just like you could or might be able to do as easily in other environments. So I think having the practical knowledge of how zoos manage all of that helps with the practicalities of conducting useful and impactful work within zoos. I think having that kind of that insider knowledge within the zoo world does make it quite a bit easier and a lot more relatable to zoos, because they recognise that the industry and how things work, and that's really key to getting the right research conducted and the research that they're going to need to make impacts and positive impacts.
When you worked as a zoo animal keeper, did you have like your favorite species?
Yeah. Yes. So I had a favorite species. I had a favorite individual. So I used to work with sort of African, quite a few different species across different areas, as it were. But my favourite was the black rhino, I used to work with white rhino quite closely. So rhinos generally and herbivores, and I think this stems back probably to my pet goat. But the herbivores have always been my kind of real push. Giraffes and rhinos, but there was always one rhino called Tala, who was my favourite girl, and I don't know whereabouts in the world she now lives. I'm assuming that she's still going. She was only about 4 or 5 when I used to work with her, but yeah, so she was a lovely girl, and you used to be able to give her a little tickle behind her ear, and she'd lean into the bars and you could carry on tickling her. And then she'd lay down and lift her leg up just like a dog, and you could tickle inside her leg, and she was so friendly and lovely. And she was a good breeding rhino, and she'd had many an offspring which she allowed me to tickle as well, which was quite a privilege. But yeah, Tala the white rhino was my favourite animal that I've worked with.
Oh wow, amazing story. It's crazy to like imagine you next to a rhino because it's so massive. It's like so giant actually.
And it's so funny. I think they can really shift when they need to. They can really run and buck around and have a great. But yeah, there was that time at the end of the day when they've been out on the field and they come in for food, and just kind of reaching through the bars and giving them a little tickle was just, yeah, that was the perfect zookeeping moment for me.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Okay, so going back to the consultancy you sometimes do in different fields, I've read so far, which is the most requested? Is it like the welfare, or more the education provision, or more about the behaviour of the animals?
I think the most prominent consultancy work that I've done at the moment is linked to both the education side of things, but also legislation. So within the United Kingdom, we have quite a strict inspection regime, I suppose, with our Zoo Licencing Act. And so generally all zoos that are registered in the UK have to meet certain criteria. And we've got some smaller zoos that don't necessarily have lots of money and lots of staff that will be able to specialise in all of the different areas. So education is one of them, and making sure that the zoo meets specific education criteria. So that might be having specific lessons and lesson plans and taught material that they can provide for and teach school groups that meet then the legislation components. But I've also been involved just recently in more international legislation. So I'm working with some teams over in South Korea to help develop their zoo legislation. So looking at how they would inspect zoos and how they would build in animal welfare into their legislating and also inspection processes. So that's been really cool as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. When did they start it?
So that was something that we were doing this July and August, and I think it's currently with their sort of government teams at the moment and looking at hopefully bringing that in 2024.
Maybe you can keep me updated.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I shall let you know when it becomes live.
Yeah.
And when it makes an impact. So yeah, that would be cool.
When you're mentioning education, what do you think is the best target group, like age-wise, to educate about zoo animals? And then, I mean, most of the times zoos are also places where you educate young or just like the public about conservation and endangered species. What would you say is like the best age to have the biggest impact?
That's a really, really good question. And I think there's kind of almost two answers at the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So certainly I think the push towards conservation education at the moment is always towards children, and trying to get the soon to be people that are voting and people that can make change and make impact, because at the end of the day, we're currently affecting their future world, and the push for zoos and the need of conservation is really focusing around, impacting change and making change for the children so that they can go forth and change things for the world. But personally, I also believe that we've got to really impact the voters, the people that can make a difference and change policies and influence conservation that way. And at the moment, certainly in this country, I think we've got maybe a predominant voter of around sort of over 50s. And they're the ones that are kind of really impacting on the voting public, I suppose, and policies and change. And at the moment, I don't think they necessarily think, and this is obviously a very big generalization, but certainly within this country, the over 50s are the ones that are predominantly voting, and they're the ones that are predominantly not thinking about, the youngsters maybe, and, they're thinking about their futures and not necessarily the future of the planet in that sense. So I think conservation education should also be really targeted towards that group as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that answer. Really, answer perfect. Yeah, not only giving one answer. As you said in the beginning of your answer, zoos, or like in general, when it's about education, we tend to like focus on really young people, and I sometimes have the feeling we forget the older one. Yeah, you're absolutely right with saying the people that have now an impact, like right now, are the ones that can vote and like actually change something. Yeah, so yeah, that's good. So maybe going back to the UK, like from the international bubble to the more national and local one, because you're also giving advice to the like UK government about different zoo matters. So what exactly does that include? Because for me, it's quite hard to like think of anything specific. Like, how does your work look like?
So it changes very much from meeting to meeting and from year to year, but generally it will be things around, so when COVID happened or started and zoos had to close their doors to the public, so it was kind of advising the government on how we can best support zoos in this environment. So looking at so there was in the UK a zoos fund, and zoos were able to apply for that fund to be able to help support maybe their conservation efforts, or also the general maintenance of the zoo in terms of feeding the animals and so on and so forth. Because generally the zoos in this country will rely on their public and visitors on the door to be able to pay for those sorts of aspects. So it was big kind of, I suppose that role was trying to advise the government and the best way in terms of how zoos could apply, what sorts of criteria they would need to meet for them to be able to receive funding. So that was one aspect. We're currently actually updating the Zoo Licencing Act and the Secretary of State Standards for Modern Zoo Practice, which is all our legislation. So we've been updating that recently, over the past 3 or 4 years, and trying to improve or increase the standards of animal welfare. So all zoos will have to kind of shift up a notch in terms of their animal welfare provisions. So we've been advising the government with regards to that. We also discuss things such as health and safety within zoos. Obviously, there's quite a big impact when things go wrong with certain species, and have been quite a few, 4 or 5 or so keeper deaths within the United Kingdom, 2 of significance by tigers in the past maybe 10 years, and so it's kind of again thinking about how we can advise to zoos and change legislation or change the needs and requirements so that these sorts of incidences don't happen again. So there's quite varied in terms of what we do, but it kind of covers health and safety, animal welfare, conservation impacts, and the zoos generally in terms of COVID. So
When you said that now for the licensing, the importance of the welfare of the animals has been increased, and that now all the zoos have to kind of step up. Yeah, what exactly does it mean? It's hard to imagine something when you don't really have some examples. Maybe you can give a few.
Yeah, sure. So generally at the moment, we have, I suppose, what are called standards that are minimum standards. So every zoo in the United Kingdom has to meet generalised, animal care standards. So they have to meet the 5 freedoms. We kind of meet those minimum standards. what we want to try and do is increase that a little bit more. So instead of just meeting the fact that, they're no longer in fear and distress, and they're no longer, all of these different freedoms, we want to try and push it. So we now have to encourage that every single animal has environmental enrichment on a daily basis. We want to make sure that animals that might be in semi-restricted environments, so animals that are tethered for certain periods of the day, have reduced hours of tethering. And they're free lofted, or they're allowed flight for more hours a day, or they're managed in a better environment for more hours of the day. Animals such as reptiles and amphibians, or even invertebrates that might be involved in education sessions, are no longer taken from their heated, UV controlled environments to be part of a display or to be part of an education session. It's that, these animals, if they are going to be part of the humans, need to kind of enter their environment. So if you want that to happen, you need to mimic the animal's environment and allow the public into that, rather than taking the animals out of their own needed specialist environments. Those sorts of tweaks and changes that need to happen. And if I suppose zoos can't change those aspects, then they need to move out of keeping that particular animal. We're not trying to close zoos or aquariums. We're trying to just improve the standards and make them work a little bit harder to meet what the animals' needs are, more so than what the public's needs are.
Do you think that also like the awareness in the public has increased, and also maybe the standards that they expect now? So is this also a push factor for legislation?
Definitely, yes. I think generally people still like zoos. So there was a recent survey of British and Irish Association member zoos, so BIASA member zoos, which is one of the zoo associations that fits within the UK. And they found that I think it was 72 or 73% of people, the public surveyed, generally do, appreciate zoos and think that what they're doing is really positive. But there's still that small percentage that don't, but it's much better than what it used to be. And I think the public's knowledge of animal behaviour and what they should be seeing in zoos and the provisions of animals is much, much higher. And so certainly with the legislation increases, we can see that, we do need to improve things. I think zoos are in a difficult situation because they invite the public in. We allow the public to come and judge us. Whereas with farms, with labs, you can't just go wandering around unless you're, specifically invited to go and have a look at, people don't know necessarily what the welfare of dairy cows are because they're not able to see them. So they'll just drink milk and have butter and cheese because they don't see the problem. Whereas zoos are opening their doors to the public. And so they're inviting critique, I suppose, in that sense. It is a bit harder.
Yeah, fascinating to mention this, the aspect of inviting the public. It's a big difference between different ways of having animals captive.
Yeah, definitely.
Point. Yeah. I was wondering, what are the roles of veterinarians regarding the welfare of zoo animals? I mean, first of all, the veterinarians, they take care of all the different species. They know a little bit about everything. They have to work together with the animal keepers, so they have to rely on them. But you mentioned already the training, for example, of the animals for some medical treatment or just like health checks. Yeah, what is the role of the veterinarian in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, so I think certainly more of the modern zoos will be trying to build the veterinarian into a positive space for the animals. I think, again, maybe back 5-10 years or even longer, the vet was always seen to be this, horrible person who comes along and takes blood samples and, knocks animals down and is this scary experience for the animals. And I think certainly now from the zoos that I work with on a regular basis, they're building the vets into that positive experience. So they're part of the training, that positive reinforcement training, so that they are not, all of a sudden the vet arrives and the animals go, oh my gosh, this is something bad's happening. And so it becomes that kind of partnership. But a lot of the time as well, the vets are there on hand because they know the kind of the science behind why animals might behave in certain ways. And they might work and communicate with the keepers on a daily basis to sort of say, oh, the keeper's noticing something's going on a little bit here. Maybe a kangaroo or a wallaby has all of a sudden started scratching at its mouth, and that's not normal. So, that might then link to, oh, well, actually there's a publication here that we found that links that to an issue called lumpy jaw, and the next thing will be drooling, and actually that's a bacterial infection, and we can start and build this in. So the keepers and the veterinarians will work together generally with, behavioural notifications and the sort of the physiology and the sort of biological sense to be able to identify issues before they become too bad, I think.
Yeah. I assume you have visited quite a lot of different zoos.
I do, yes.
Yeah. Do you have, maybe that's the last question, do you have a favourite one?
I do, and I think you'll be very happy. So back in 2019, some colleagues of mine, so I work quite closely with Jeff Hosey, who's a professor, and Jeroen Stevens, who's over in Belgium, who does a lot of work with bonobos. And we did a little zoo tour around Germany. And I mean, Germany has some amazing zoos. The advancements in terms of their enclosure design is absolutely out of this world. So I love German zoos. And my favourite, I think, was Leipzig Zoo. Oh. There was a lot that I went to, and a lot of good ones, but I think I like Burger Zoo, but yeah, definitely, Leipzig Zoo is definitely up there with one of my favourite zoos.
And what is the reason?
Yeah, so a lot of the exhibits are quite like a mixed species exhibit, because when they work, they're providing enrichment for the animals just from the natural living of the way that the animals would be in the wild. I think it's really educational. I think it's also really good for the animals when it works well. And so Leipzig had got a really good African exhibit. So it's got sort of rhinos nearby. They've got I think they've got various different antelope, zebra, oryx, and also giraffe, all kind of in the same mixed species exhibit. The viewing platforms were brilliant. The interactions between the animals was really great to see. They'd also got this massive, great big biome called Gondwanaland, and the different animals in there and the different experiences and viewpoints that you could see as a visitor. The sloth, I think, wasn't meant to initially have had the reign of the entire exhibit, but I think they'd managed to maneuver themselves, and so basically we're just kind of climbing around on the roof of Gondwanaland. So have an amazing exhibit and amazing views of everywhere within there. So there were so many different exhibits that really just stood out in my mind in terms of really high welfare, really great visitor experience, and just a really nice, pleasant zoo to be in.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I love to hear that. Great. So cool. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. It was really lovely to speak to you, and also to hear this very positive experience from you about one zoo in Germany.
That's quite a few. If people would like to invite me to come and see other zoos in Germany, I'm more than happy to come along and visit.
Yeah, I will send you all the invitations forward.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to share with us that I didn't ask? Any last words?
I think actually one thing that I would just like to try and I suppose emphasize a little bit more. Yeah. I suppose a lot of previous sort of research and focus has been quite negative around zoos. And I think a lot of that, focus on stereotypic behaviours and abnormal behaviours is very easy to research because we don't see it in the wild. I think the push now towards maybe a more positive, behavioural recognition is harder, because how do you know that it's a positive behaviour? How do you know that it's good? Because it occurs in the wild, but it also occurs in zoos. But some of my research now that's starting to come through and we're publishing at the moment is around that positive behavioural recognition. And, if all we're looking for is negative behaviours, then all we're going to see are negative behaviours. And so we need to really push animal welfare research towards looking at positive and negative, also recognising and identifying that animals in zoos do perform positive behaviours a lot of the time, most of the time, and we just need to really recognise that, and that zoos can be really good places for animals to live, as well as maybe some that might not or might need a bit more improvement.
Yeah, these were some great last words.
Yeah.
Then thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great chatting.
And that's it. I hope you have learned something new or have been inspired. If so, please share it with someone you know, and let's make the world a little wiser. If you want to find out more about Sam's work, you can find her email address in the description, but you also can just have a look at ResearchGate. Okay, see you next time.